was a cold April evening when June Walker first heard the knock. Her small cabin sat at the edge of the forest, a mile off the main road, where only the sound of the wind through the pines ever broke the quiet. She'd lived there alone since her husband passed 7 years ago. A quiet life filled with gardening, old radio shows and long talks with her cat, Daisy. That night rain was falling steady, tapping the roof in a slow, familiar rhythm. June was reading by the fireplace when the knock came again, soft, uncertain, and out of place in the middle of nowhere. She froze for a second, then set her book down and listened. 3 knocks, then silence. June's first thought was that maybe someone's car had broken down. She pulled on her sweater, grabbed her flashlight, and went to the door. But when she opened it, there was no one standing there. Only the dark porch, slick with rain and the smell of wet pine in the air. Her light swept across the steps and stopped. Lying there, wrapped in a torn blanket, was something small. At first she thought it was an animal, until she saw the tiny hand. Her breath caught. It was a baby, but not like any she'd ever seen. Its skin was dusky gray, covered in a fine layer of dark hair. Its face, though peaceful, looked different, broader, the eyes large and deep-set even in sleep. She knelt down, heart pounding, unsure if it was breathing, until she felt a faint warmth against her fingers. The baby stirred, letting out a weak, trembling sound. June didn't think twice. She scooped it up, carried it inside, and laid it by the fire, wrapping it in one of her flannel towels. The baby's breathing steadied. Its small chest rose and fell a little stronger with each breath. As she sat there staring, her mind ran wild. Who could have left it there? Why, her door. When she stepped outside again, her light caught something else. Large, wet footprints in the mud. They weren't human. Bare, wide, almost twice the length of her own boot. The trail led back toward the woods. June stood there under the rain, staring into the blackness of the trees, feeling a strange mix of fear and pity. Whoever left that child on her doorstep hadn't meant her harm. She could feel it. And before the night was over, June would realize she wasn't alone out there at all. Morning came gray and quiet. The storm had passed, leaving the woods soaked and steaming under the pale sun. June hadn't slept a minute. She kept checking the small bundle by the fireplace, afraid it might stop breathing. When the first light touched the curtains, she finally saw the baby's face clearly. Its tiny features were peaceful, its eyes closed, the faint rise and fall of its chest steady now. There was something gentle about it, almost human, but not quite. The soft hair across its arms and cheeks shimmered faintly in the light. June warmed milk on the stove and tried to feed it with a spoon. The baby turned its head away at first, but then took a little. That small act broke something in her. The loneliness that had sat in her chest for years eased just for a moment. After sunrise, June stepped outside. Her porch was a mess. Mud, broken twigs, and heavy prints leading toward the tree line. She crouched beside them, laying her hand next to one. It was twice as wide, with deep toes pressed into the wet soil. She followed the prints for a few yards until the ground turned soft with moss. The trail ended near the edge of the creek. The grass there was bent flat, as if something heavy had stood watching her house for a long time. June looked around, heart thumping, but saw nothing except mist moving through the trees. Whatever had come in the night was gone now. But it had left something behind, not just the child, but a feeling that the woods themselves were watching. She whispered under her breath, "Who are you?" And from deep in the forest, a crow called back. That evening, the forest settled early. A soft fog rolled down from the hills, wrapping the cabin in pale silence. June lit the fire again, laid a thick quilt on the couch, and placed the baby in a basket lined with old towels. The child slept most of the day, but as dusk fell, it stirred. Small whimpers, soft movements. When she lifted it into her arms, it clung to her shirt, its tiny fingers curling tight. June felt that touch deep in her heart. It had been years since anyone had needed her like that. She hummed an old lullaby she used to sing to her niece decades ago. The baby quieted almost instantly, eyelids fluttering. That sound, that trust, made her eyes sting. Outside, she could hear the forest breathing, frogs by the creek, an owl in the distance, the occasional rustle in the brush. But one sound made her stop, a deep, low cry. not a human voice. It came from far off between the trees, drawn out, aching like grief turned into sound. It rose once, then faded into the mist. June froze, listening. Daisy, her cat, darted under the table. She stepped to the window, heart pounding. The woods looked still, the fog moving slowly among the trunks. She couldn't see anything, but she felt something. That same quiet presence she'd sensed the night before. For a moment, she almost opened the door. Some part of her wanted to call out, to say that the baby was safe. But fear kept her still. The cry never came again. June turned back to the fire, holding the child close. Its small hand brushed her neck, and she whispered softly, "You're all right now. You're safe here." But deep down she knew. Someone out there was listening, and they hadn't gone far. The next morning broke cold and clear. Mist hung low over the creek, and the ground was still damp from the rain. June bundled the baby in a blanket and laid it gently in the old wicker cradle by the fire, before stepping outside. The woods were quiet. Too quiet. Even the birds seemed hesitant to sing. She walked toward the creek, following the same path she'd noticed before. The grass was bent again, freshly pressed. When she reached the water's edge, she saw them, the footprints. Huge, clear, and deep. They led from the forest to the opposite bank, stopping where the mud gave way to pebbles. She crouched down, studying them in the morning light. Each step was almost twice the length of her forearm, wide and flat, the toes perfectly defined. These weren't bear prints. They weren't human either. Something heavy had been there recently, watching her cabin again. Then she saw something else. A smaller set of prints beside the larger ones. Lighter, unsteady, like a child walking beside its parent. Her chest tightened. The thought hit her all at once: the baby wasn't abandoned. It was left for safety. June straightened slowly, scanning the trees. She felt eyes on her, the same invisible weight she'd sensed before. The air around her felt thick, almost charged. "Are you out there?" she whispered. "I'm taking care of your baby." No answer, only the soft rush of the creek. But something moved in the mist across the water, a shadow between two trees. Broad shoulders, a shape too large to mistake. It lingered for only a second, then faded back into the woods. June stood frozen, heart pounding, but strangely calm. Whoever, whatever it was, it had hurt her, and for the first time she wasn't afraid. That evening the fog came early again. It slid through the trees like smoke, curling around the porch posts and across the yard. June had drawn the curtains, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was just beyond them, waiting. The baby had grown restless all day, making small, low sounds, almost like it was calling for someone. Every time the wind brushed the windows, it turned its head, eyes searching. June didn't know if it was fear or longing, but either way, she held the child close and whispered, "It's all right, sweetheart. You're safe here." Still, she couldn't rest. Around midnight, she poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, peeking through the curtain. The yard was washed in fog, the trees pale and half hidden. For a long time, nothing moved. Then she saw it. A tall, dark figure standing near the tree line, still as stone. The outline was unmistakable. Broad shoulders, thick fur glistening faintly with moisture. The same shape she'd glimpsed by the creek. June's breath caught in her throat. The figure didn't move closer, but it didn't leave either. It simply stood there, watching the cabin. Minutes passed. The baby stirred and made a faint cry. The figure's head lifted slightly at the sound. Then, as quietly as it had appeared, it stepped back into the fog and was gone. June didn't sleep that night. She sat in the rocking chair by the cradle, listening to the faint drip of rain outside. She knew now it wasn't a wild creature hunting. It was a parent. It had come to check if its child was safe. And somehow June understood. "Losing someone once changes how you see loss in others," she whispered to the darkness. "You can trust me." The forest gave no reply, only a soft rustle, as if something large was turning away, satisfied, retreating back into the mist. 3 days passed in quiet rhythm. June cared for the baby like it was her own, warming milk, humming old songs, keeping it wrapped and warm by the fire. Each night she'd glance toward the woods, half expecting to see that shape again. But the forest stayed silent. By the fourth morning, the child had begun to change, stronger now, more alert. Its eyes followed her everywhere, deep brown and almost human in their focus. When she smiled, it made a small sound back. Not quite a laugh, but close. June found herself talking to it as if it could understand every word. Still, a strange sadness hung over her. She knew this wasn't her child. It belonged to someone else. Someone out there in the trees waiting. That evening, as the sun slipped low behind the ridge, June heard the first sound. A low, distant cry carried through the wind. It wasn't threatening. It was mournful, calling. She stepped out onto the porch, heart racing. The air was thick with fog again, rolling slow across the clearing. Then from between the trees she saw movement. Two shapes this time, one large towering and another smaller beside it. Both paused at the edge of the clearing. The tall one stepped forward. June could see its face now. Deep amber eyes, matted fur streaked with silver, a scar across its chest. It looked old, tired, but not wild. Its gaze went straight to the window where the baby lay sleeping. June whispered, "You came back." She felt no fear, only understanding. Carefully, she lifted the baby, still swaddled, and walked to the edge of the porch. The creature didn't move closer. It only let out a soft rumble, low and aching, as if thanking her. June set the bundle on the steps and backed away. The fog shifted, and in a single smooth motion, the creature crossed the yard and lifted the baby into its arms. It held the child close, rocking gently, then turned its eyes toward June, not as a stranger, but as another soul who understood loss. Then, just as quietly as it had come, it faded back into the mist. By morning, the fog had lifted. The forest looked calm again, innocent, as if nothing had happened. But when June stepped onto the porch, the only trace of the night before was a set of enormous footprints leading back toward the hills. The cradle was empty. For a long moment, she just stood there, hands trembling. She knew what she had seen. She knew it hadn't been a dream. But as the hours passed, a strange doubt crept in. How could she ever explain it? Who would believe that something like that had come to her door and taken back its child? 2 days later, Sheriff Atkins came by to check on her. He was a kind man, graying and patient, but when June tried to tell him what had happened, his smile faltered. "You're saying something left a baby here, and then came back for it?" June nodded. It wasn't human, Sheriff, but it wasn't dangerous. It just wanted its child back. He shifted awkwardly, writing something in his small notebook. "You've been out here alone a long time, June. Sometimes we see things when we're lonely." She felt her throat tighten. "I know what I saw. There were footprints, big ones. You can still see them by the creek. They went out there together, but the prints were gone, washed away by rain. The ground was smooth, untouched." The sheriff sighed softly and patted her arm. Maybe it was a wild animal carried off a blanket or something. June didn't argue. There was no use. That night she sat alone by the fire, staring at the small blanket that still smelled faintly of pine and smoke. She folded it carefully and placed it inside an old wooden chest. Beside it, she laid a tiny stone she'd found near the porch steps. Smooth, shaped like a teardrop. Outside, the woods were still. But every now and then she thought she heard something, a faint cry carried by the wind, low and mournful, drifting from far off in the trees. No one in town ever believed her story. They smiled politely, nodded, and changed the subject. But June knew the truth. She had seen love in a form most people would never understand. Wild, wordless, and real. And though the footprints vanished, that feeling never did. Years passed quietly after that night. The world moved on, seasons changed, people came and went, but June stayed in her cabin by the woods. She grew older, her hair turning silver like the mist that rolled down from the hills every morning. No one spoke much about what she had said that spring. In town, they treated her kindly but cautiously, as if she was a fragile old woman who'd seen too much of her own imagination. But June never argued, never defended her story. She just smiled, bought her groceries, and went back home. The woods were her comfort. They always had been. Every evening, she would sit on her porch with a cup of tea, looking toward the tree line where the fog gathered thickest. Sometimes, when the light faded and the cicadas began their low hum, she thought she could see movement, a slow shadow between the pines, tall and silent. Once, years later, she found something near the steps again, a smooth river stone carved faintly with two shapes, one large, one small, their edges worn by time. She picked it up with shaking hands, feeling a warmth rise behind her eyes. She didn't need to wonder who had left it there. That night, she placed the stone beside the tiny blanket in the old wooden chest. The firelight flickered across her face as she whispered, "Thank you." As the years went on, her health faded. The winters grew harder. But June stayed. She said she didn't fear the woods. She trusted them more than people. When she finally passed, it was in her sleep, a faint smile on her lips. The neighbors found her sitting by the window, wrapped in her shawl, her gaze turned toward the trees. At her small funeral, no one mentioned the story. They spoke of her kindness, her quiet strength, her love for the mountains. The sheriff, now old himself, stood beside her grave and whispered, maybe she did see something after all. Weeks later, a local hiker passing through the valley noticed something odd near June's cabin. Down by the creek where the mud still held morning dew, there were footprints from a large, heavy, unmistakable, leading toward the woods. Beside them, pressed faintly in the soft earth, was a smaller set. Both sets stopped at the edge of the trees, where the grass grew tall, and though no one saw anything move, the air there felt different, warmer, quieter, almost grateful. Some say the woods remember those who love them. Maybe they do, because even now, on misty mornings, a few locals claim they hear a woman's soft voice whispering through the pines, gentle, steady, like a mother calling home what the world never understood.